Welcome to another episode of Live from the Wish House with me, Cris. If you're a regular, welcome back. And if it's your first time, I'm so happy you're here. My path profoundly changed when my son was diagnosed with autism. My marriage collapsed, and I began to develop my own Cris philosophies to navigate and thrive. I'm here to connect with you, to share and learn, and together we can open our minds to creating the life we love to live. So please subscribe, like, share, and most importantly, comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, and stories. So we are in the midst of talking about control. The very mention of control sends you shaking a little bit. I said in the first episode that as soon as I hear the word control, I think of somebody controlling me, and then it gives me angst. But the second thing I think about, if you were a child of the 80s or the 90s, you have to think about Janet Jackson's song, Control. That was like such a great song and such a great dance thing. That whole album, I think that was the Rhythm Nation album. If you don't know it, go find it. But Janet Jackson penned the anthem for Control. She says, this is a story about control, my control of what I say. And at this time, I'm going to do it my way. There comes that rebellious spirit. And she says, are you ready? I am, because it's all about control. And that's how I feel when I'm talking about this very subject. She also goes on to say, when I was 17, I did what people told me. I did what my father said, and I let my mother mold me. I think she was like reading my diary. But that was long ago. And then she says, I'm in control. Never stop control to get what I want. I'm not Janet Jackson, but that's my imitation of that song. And on. And that's exactly what we were talking about in the last episode, control. Except Janet was probably in her early 20s when she recorded that song. She was able to say, when I was 17, and now I'm in control. That didn't happen for me until 40-ish. When I begin each podcast, I do the little introduction, and the introduction says exactly what that was. My son was diagnosed with autism, and my marriage collapsed. Two big life events that happened close to me turning 40. And up until that time, even though in many ways I was quite happy and had a free life and had a good job, and, you know, there were still struggles, and you're building your life with your partner and all of the things that life brings you, I still was in some sort of control. It was a very ordered life, and I don't mean to be flippant about it. It's an expression. I woke up one morning and it all changed. All the things that will come to you that's always been my life. All the things that are going to come to you always come to me in a large package. And then I have to deal with them and get to the next step. But it's very true. The two big life events happened. And I often say that was the pivotal point in my life. It was the moment I felt the most in control, because it was the first time after 40 years that I felt like I had choice. We have no control. Choice is our only modicum of control. We have choices, and choices equal freedom. And having choices, feel so liberating. That's why you hear that word in all sorts of venues, in all sorts of topics, in the political arena, in the community arena, school choice, women's choice. And when people talk about those things, they feel liberated. People that are involved in the movement of things with the word choice, you can't help but feel liberated. You can't help but feel free. And you can't help but feel that momentary instance of control, because it really is the only control that we have. Choice. As long as we have choice, we're good. Doesn't mean that we can change exactly what's happening, but what we can change is how we react to what's happening. Because what's happening to us is always going to happen. I like to change that up often if I hear myself say it. Things don't happen to us, they happen for us. Even if it's something that feels like a tragedy, and may be something, I'm not minimizing personal tragedy. It may be something that affects the rest of your life, that scars your emotional life for the rest of your life. I see people all of the time, we all hear about people all the time that have things happen to them that are devastating. And we hear others say, oh, that shouldn't happen to such a good person. Or you lose a parent early in life. It's tragic. You have all sorts of things that can come your way. Somebody goes off to war and they don't come back. I mean, I tend not to be a person that speaks negative, but we could sit here and just name 12 things that could happen that would feel incredibly tragic to us. The not good news is that some of us human beings on the planet are going to experience those very things. My mother used to say, by the grace of God, which is basically the metaphor, the expression of, I don't want that to happen to me. If I'll take anything else but those things that happen. But we don't have any choice. You can't predict. I remember there's a scene in Twister. I'm always saying, I'm always quoting these pop culture movies. And Bill Paxton is talking about the twister that's coming. And he says those exact words. You don't know, you can't see it. And he says, you can't predict it. And that's so very true. And life, actually, as a metaphor, is kind of like a twister, It's calm sailing until the twister shows up. And sometimes the twister can be the F1, and sometimes it can be like the F5. I think it's the letter F. The most devastating one of all, the one that knocks your house down, your metaphorical house. And knowing that is possible, that everything is possible, all the great things that happen to us in our life are possible, and all of the things we don't want are possible. Every single thing is possible. And when you know that, then knowing that you have the choice of how to face that is the best road to go. That's your best armor against the feeling of the tight chest control, is to find the path of your choice. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples from my life. I'm going to reference my son once again. So I do a speaking engagement every other week for people who are going to be working with people with special needs. And I give what's called a parent perspective. I tell my story. And in the story, I say that I had my whole life ordered and controlled the way I thought it was going to go. And none of the things that I thought were going to happen for me happened. I've referenced this before, but it's kind of fun to listen to the Cris dreams of old. I thought I was going to get married. We all did, 60s and 70s. If you were a girl on the cusp of the women's liberation movement, as they called it, and the old school, everybody needs to find a husband. And so I was on board with finding the husband. Most of the TV shows had that portrayed in a really cool way. So I was on board. I was on board with the find a husband, and I was going to be a teacher at some point. I thought secretly in my heart, not wanting to rebel against the old I'm going to be famous path that my parents chose. So I was going to get married. I was going to have a split level house. I loved split level houses. And there was a road in my town, Santa Maria Drive, and it had all split level houses. And I used to drive when I was 16 years old through that neighborhood, trying to pick out which one I wanted. Oh, I like the olive green one. Oh, I like the one with the bricks in the front. I was obsessed with split level housing with a breezeway, and I wanted a pool, and I wanted 3 kids, and I really wanted to marry a guy who was blue collar, just like my dad. That was my whole goal in life, to have that set up. And absolutely, well, I did the blue collar marriage, but that collapsed. So that also falls in that absolutely nothing I thought was going to happen in my life happened. But, and I say this with complete sincerity and honesty, it turned out to be the best life ever. And it turned out to be the best life ever because somewhere around age 40, I realized I'm not in control. But I have choices about how I take the things that have been given to me that weren't the things I asked for and were not going away. So when my son was close to 3 years old, he was diagnosed with autism. There was something I didn't see coming. Nobody wants their child to have any kind of a situation, an issue that's going to make them not be able to live the best quality of life that you think they should live. And it's a very devastating thing to hear that there's something that your child has or is going to live with that is different from what you thought and is different from the rest of the people in your community, in your state, in your country, on the planet. And so having my son diagnosed with autism it came out of nowhere, and it wasn't going away. That wasn't going away. And you learn swiftly how that's not going away. In the beginning, I thought I could maybe cure it. My son was diagnosed at the end of the 90s. And there was a lot of books being written by really great moms, well-meaning researchers that said if you did certain, and not crazy things, we've talked about this in my autism series, but if you did certain teaching techniques, that you would be able to almost rewire the brain, right? It's kind of like the same way if you break your leg, right? Now you can't walk on your leg, and oftentimes you need occupational therapy after that, or you need some sort of rehab after that so that you can train your leg, rewire your brain and your muscles to do the walking. And so there was a lot of research done on if you just do this way of teaching your child that you could then cure them of this. Their brain could be rewired. And so did I go into it when I started that wonderful educational program with my son? Did I go into that thinking that I could cure him? Probably about 20-30% of my brain was on that track. I often say you have to shoot for the stars, right? So if you have a child or if you have anybody in your family that wants to go to the Olympics, you don't say, okay, we'll just practice a little and let's shoot for the bronze. You don't say that. You get up every morning and you drive them to the skating rink at 4 a.m. so they can get the gold. That's what we're going for. But then if you get to the Olympics and you win the bronze, you're happy. You're okay. You take what you get because you put in your best effort. So that's how I looked at my son's recovery at the time. And then the more I went along in the journey, I realized there's not a recovery. And what would that actually be? What would I at one point and early on started to realize what I needed to do for my son was to give him the best quality of life, to give him the best education, if you will, on how to live on this planet with the issues that he had. But you start learning that. It's not that you give up what you think, it's that you start learning these things are coming to you and they're here and they're not going anywhere. Now, I know a lot of moms and dads too. I've often talked about the fact that my marriage collapsed because of the autism. And there's a lot of people that do collapse under the stress of having a child that it's almost too sad for them. It's almost too much for them to bear. Not an excuse, because we all go through our own, you should be stepping up to the plate kind of things, but that's not what this podcast is about. But we know that some people can't, they collapse under that. And that can go their whole life. I have friends that still say to me about their own children, I wonder if it'll ever be different. I wonder if there's hope for that to be fixed. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, my son's 31 now. I'm thinking, who would he be if he wasn't this? I'm at the completely embraced point. This is who my son is. We have continued to have a great life, but I chose to accept what came my way, acknowledge that it wasn't what I wanted, but I moved on, and it wasn't easy at first because there are nights where you put your child to sleep and you come and you sit in the living room and you pour yourself a glass of wine and you think of what might have been. What did I want? What did I start to have? And now I don't have it. And it does bring on moments of sadness. It doesn't, having choice and working the program, if you will, that I work by doesn't bring you every single day of happiness, but it does bring you the steps to more happiness. And so that I find myself here now, over 20 years later, able to do the things that I did then with much more ease. And it's rare that I'm worried about what's coming my way. It's rare that when something does come my way that I'm completely freaked out over it. Doesn't mean I don't have some stressful nights with no sleep. We all have that. That's being human. Doesn't mean that I have a tipping point or that I don't cry. We all have that. That's human. But the overall trajectory, because I say that again, trajectory of my life is not one of despair or looking to fix it immediately. I began to learn through Anthony's autism that it's here, it's not going anywhere. Now, what am I going to do to make my life and his life work well so that now we look back and my son and I talk about memories. As a matter of fact, yesterday we were playing a game. I took my playlist And I would just push the song and he would identify it. We'd do all these little fun things. And then he'd have to tell me the memory. What does that remind you of? Which is a skill, by the way, that had to be developed. That's another podcast. But he was able to do that, and we were laughing over all the memories. I knew what he was going to say, but he remembered all of the things. And it reminded me of what a great life we experienced because of accepting the challenge that came my way. And also remembering that just because my son has a disability, a differing ability, for lack of better terms, doesn't mean that other people without those differing abilities aren't struggling in other ways. There's other moms, if we're talking about moms, there's other moms struggling in other ways with their children. We're always going to worry about our loved ones, no matter who they are, no matter where they go. If your child turns out to be the president of the United States, you're still going to worry about that person because they, to you, are your child. So really, we're all in the same boat, just our circumstances are a little different. Recently, there's been a lot of friends that have had things happening to them, whether they be not wanted or wanted, surrounding moving. And it reminded me of, I had an experience some years ago where I'd been living in a home for 13 years. And my son had left to live in his community, and I was still there. And one day I got a phone call from my landlady. And she told me that I had to leave. I'd been there 13 years. And she said, I'm going to take over your house. We're selling our house. And it was quick. And it wasn't like a joy-filled conversation. It was kind of abrupt. And I flipped out. I did. I was hysterical crying. I didn't know what to do. I can tell you the exact date. It was election day, which in the teaching world, we use as the superintendent's conference day. So the kids don't come to work, but we go and do professional development. And I called my director and said I was going to be late because I couldn't breathe. I was crying so much. I was like, oh my God, this is the only home my son has known. And how am I going to move? And where am I going to go? And I was distraught for maybe 48 hours, maybe big distraught for 24 and then little distraught for 48. And then I decided, well, this is happening. This is happening. I didn't want to pack. I didn't know where I was going. I was renting. Where was it going to be the next landlord? And in 17 days, she gave me a month. She wanted me to leave in a month. And in 17 days, I moved. I moved to a better apartment with central air and my own washer dryer in the home. I'd never had that. This one where I'd lived was in the basement. So it was in the home, but I had to go downstairs. This was like right there. It was a brand new apartment. It was a lot more than I was used to spending. But it was a safe, beautiful apartment, and I really liked the landlords. They lived downstairs. I didn't want that. I wanted to be on the first floor, but that didn't work. I took it anyway. And then I just I've always been very blessed to have many friends in the community I live in. I just put the all call out, and the next thing you know, between the moving company and my friends with trucks and all my friends coming to pack, we moved in 17 days. I moved 13 years of life and more. But 13 years of life in that house out in 17 days into the apartment that I could barely afford. But that's another thing that's going to be for another day. But I've often talked about the relationship with money, the accepting what you have and believing that you'll always have what you need. I never think about it. I didn't think about it then. I knew in the back of my mind, yeah, this is a little bit pricey, but you're going to get everything that you need. And I did. And it made, I'm going to say 85% of that experience so much better, because by that time I had been working this kind of program of acceptance and choosing and letting go of the control. The crisis Anthony went in when he was in his teen years. Oftentimes young men with autism become what's known as emotionally dysregulated, and they develop a lot of behaviors and they can't leave the house. And sometimes they have emotional outbursts or actual behaviors where they're physically throwing or in some instances they can be pushing you and hurting you, and they don't mean to do that because they are precious souls, but that's how it's coming out. So kind of think about when you are upset, that we all have banged a table or I remember once throwing something. There's a famous scene in Sex and the City where Sarah Jessica Parker hits the chrysanthemums on the table and she knocks them down and the water goes all over, and that camera pans to that. the absurdity almost of having knocked down these flowers in your house. Now there's water all over your floor and the vase breaks and now she has to clean it up, but we all have had those moments where you're just looking at yourself saying, what am I doing? But when you have autism and in a certain subset, those things are not something that can be controlled, for lack of a better word. And they don't know how to stop that outburst. And it was very challenging. And I just believed I was going to get through that and did all the necessary steps. I kept choosing my mindset. I kept choosing the right avenues. I kept relying on people and the team and doctors and everything that I needed. And I spent minimal time looking for the control of it and saying, how come I don't have control? What am I supposed to do with this? How can I fix this? You can't fix it. You have to choose to accept it and then find all the answers in it. Setting boundaries, you might have a family that is hard to deal with. It's a very big thing on social media now, parents talking about estranged children and children talking about adult children not being able to relate to their families anymore. The harshness of setting boundaries with people that should be your most closest allies, but who somehow aren't guiding you, aren't raising you, for lack of a better word, aren't partnering with you as a parent in the most healthy way. And so it's hard, if you're growing up in a judgmental family, and I'm talking about a seriously judgmental family where your choices or your just who you are as a human being isn't accepted. The learning of setting boundaries, not easy, but again, no, there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. You have to change yourself. You have to save yourself. You have to accept the situation. That's how I do it. Accept the situation. Go through what needs to go through first. Accept it and find the choices. And it feels so freeing to do that. And it's so possible. It's absolutely possible. There's a little meme, and I think I'm gonna mess it up, but it has something to do if it's not over, people say it's going to be over. If it's not over, that's because the whole thing isn't over. Meaning, your life, we all know our life is finite. It's going to end. Our lives are going to end. So, as my mother would say, by the grace of God, it ends in your late 90s or in your early 100s. That's what we all strive for, a good long life with our minds and our health somewhat intact, because that's something we can't control either. But it's true. You look and you say, oh, this person isn't here at age 36 or 45 or 57. But we all know that it's coming at some point. That's the only thing that's a definite. How we can't sit around worrying about that. We can't sit around feeling our whole life is one of control and that we have to fix it and that we have to move through it in a harsh fashion. You have to accept that we don't know when all of that stuff is coming. Not even dwell on it. Just throw it. Okay, I don't know when that is. You start to think about it more as you age, but I don't know when that's going to happen. So for today, I'm going to be present and alive and make choices that are going to make me feel free. And I'm going to do my best to let the control go. I'm not in control, and I have no control over what's coming to me. I can only create from what's given to me. Think of it like clay. Somebody gives you clay, make something. Remember when you were a kid, you had Play-Doh? Somebody gives you the Play-Doh, make something out of that. Don't just sit there and say, I can't do it because I don't have all the fancy toys that come with the Play-Doh, the little cutting thing and the push the thing through the star thing, okay? You might not have all that. You might just have the Play-Doh. It's up to you to decide you can do something with that. And next, we're going to talk about kicking control to the curb and get specific about how to free yourself from all of that. And that'll be here next time at the Wish House.